The gunshot that shattered the dawn silence left no doubt in Eleanor Camden's mind her worst nightmare had begun. She clutched her 6-month-old son Noah closer to her chest, his warm weight the only reality that mattered as boots pounded on the wooden porch of her small homestead cabin. The year was 1875, and the Dakota Territory held no mercy for a young widow trying to maintain her husband's claim. Eleanor had known this day might come since Thomas had died from fever last winter, leaving her alone with their infant son, and a deed to land that men with power and money coveted too much to let a woman keep. "Open up, Mrs. Camden, sheriff's orders." The voice belonged to Wilkes, the railroad company's hired muscle who masqueraded as a deputy when it suited the county judge. Eleanor's trembling fingers smoothed Noah's downy hair as she pressed her lips to his forehead. "Hush, my sweet boy," she whispered, though he hadn't made a sound. The baby stared up at her with wide eyes, as if understanding that silence was their only defense. The door splintered under the force of a boot, and 3 men entered her home without invitation or warrant. Sheriff Dobbs with his substantial belly straining against tarnished brass buttons, Wilkes with his pockmarked face and yellow teeth, and Judge Harmon in his city clothes, looking out of place but more dangerous than the others combined. "Eleanor Camden, by order of the Territorial Court, this property has been foreclosed due to unpaid taxes and failure to meet homesteading requirements," Judge Harmon announced, unfolding a document with flourish. "Furthermore, as you have no visible means of supporting your child, the court has determined that the infant would be better served at the Westridge Orphan Asylum until such time as a suitable family can be found." "No," the word tore from Eleanor's throat. "There must be some mistake. I've paid every tax bill I've received. The land is cleared, the crops are planted, the law requires a man's labor," Wilkes cut in with a cruel smile. "A woman can't properly work a claim." Eleanor backed away until her shoulders met the wall. "My son stays with me." "You have no right, I have every right," Judge Harmon said coldly. "Wilkes, take the child." Eleanor fought like a wildcat, but Wilkes was twice her size. His fingers dug into her arms as he pried Noah from her grasp. The baby's wails joined her own desperate cries as the sheriff restrained her. "Please," she begged, watching as Judge Harmon took her son and stepped outside. "He's all I have." Through the open door, she could see the wagon from the orphanage waiting. A stern-faced woman reached for Noah, wrapping him in a gray blanket that looked as cold and institutional as the future they planned for him. When they released Eleanor, she ran barefoot into the yard, stumbling in the dirt as the wagon began to roll away, her son's cries growing fainter. "Noah!" She screamed, falling to her knees, watching helplessly as the distance between them grew. She didn't notice the tall figure on horseback who had been watching from the ridge above her property. Nor did she see him spur his horse into action, following the wagon's dust trail with single-minded determination. Nathan Westfield had come to deliver a message, not to get involved in local troubles. But the sight of a mother's heart breaking as her child was stolen by men hiding behind badges and paper laws was something no decent man could ignore. His own childhood had taught him that lesson too well. Digging his heels into his horse's flanks, Nathan made his decision. The wagon had a head start, but it was heavy and would follow the main road. He knew these hills better than most, having spent the last 3 years mapping the territory for the army before striking out on his own. "Come on, Rusty," he urged, his chestnut gelding. "We've got a baby to catch." Eleanor's lungs burned as she ran after the wagon until it disappeared around the bend. She collapsed by the roadside, her tears cutting tracks through the dust on her face. The cruel reality settled over her like a shroud. They had taken her baby, her sweet Noah, and with him, her very heart. But despair quickly hardened into resolve. She would not lose her son. She had buried a husband, she would not bury her hope as well. Rising to her feet, Eleanor hurried back to her cabin. The men were still there, already measuring the property and discussing its value once the railroad came through. They paid her no mind as she slipped inside, gathering what she needed with deliberate speed. In the small bedroom, Eleanor changed from her house dress into her only pair of riding pants, kept from her days before marriage when she'd worked her father's ranch. She pulled on Thomas's old boots, too large but serviceable, and his hat to shield her face from the sun. From under the floorboard beneath their bed, she retrieved the small box that held their emergency money. $37.12 in total. Finally, she took Thomas's revolver from its hiding place and checked that it was loaded. She had no intention of using it if she could avoid it, but the weight of it in her saddlebag provided some comfort in a world that had just proven itself even more dangerous than she'd feared. The men were surprised when she emerged dressed for travel, leading her mare Penny from the small barn behind the house. "Where do you think you're going, Mrs. Camden?" Sheriff Dobbs called out, his hand moving to his own weapon. "I'm leaving, since you've made it clear I'm not welcome on my own property," she replied steadily. "Unless you plan to arrest me as well," Judge Harmon stepped forward. "The court has made no ruling against your freedom, Mrs. Camden, only your fitness as a mother under current circumstances. If you wish to contest the ruling, you may petition the territorial court in Fort Laramie." Eleanor mounted her horse, looking down at the man who had torn her family apart. "I'll do more than petition, Judge. I'll have my son back and justice for what you've done today." With that, she turned Penny toward the road and rode away from the only home she'd known since her marriage. She would find Noah. Nothing else mattered. Nathan Westfield kept the wagon in sight, staying just far enough back to avoid detection. The orphanage wagon moved at a steady pace, obviously in no hurry since they believed their acquisition was legal and unchallenged. As the afternoon sun beat down on him, Nathan considered his options. He was one man against what was likely a driver and at least one guard, plus the woman he'd seen take the baby. Direct confrontation could end badly, particularly with an infant involved. The wagon was heading toward Clearwater, the nearest town of any size, about 20 miles from the Camden homestead. Nathan guessed they would stop there for the night before continuing to Westridge, where the territorial orphanage was located another day's journey to the east. His suspicions were confirmed when, as dusk approached, the wagon pulled into the yard of the Clearwater Hotel. Nathan observed from across the street as the driver and another man jumped down, followed by the stern-faced woman still carrying the bundle that contained the baby. Nathan tied Rusty to a hitching post outside the saloon and watched the hotel entrance. He needed information before he could act, and saloons were always the best place to gather intelligence. The Broken Spoke Saloon was like 100 others Nathan had visited across the Western Territories, loud, smoky, and full of men looking to forget their troubles in whiskey and cards. He ordered a beer and took it to a corner table where he could watch the room while keeping his back to the wall, a habit from his army days. It didn't take long for the wagon driver to appear, apparently leaving his companions to settle in at the hotel while he sought entertainment. Nathan recognized him by the orphanage emblem stitched to his jacket sleeve, a tree with spreading branches. The man settled into a poker game, and Nathan bided his time. An hour passed, then two. The driver drank heavily and lost consistently, his mood souring with each hand. When the man finally stepped outside for air, Nathan followed. In the alley beside the saloon, Nathan caught up with him. "Evening," he said casually, lighting a cigarette. "Tough night at the tables." The driver squinted at him in the dim light. "What's it to you? Nothing personal." "Just making conversation." Nathan offered the man a cigarette, which he accepted. "Noticed you drove in with the orphanage wagon. Coming from far," the driver took a deep drag. "Just a pickup. Some widow couldn't keep her kid. Judge said the baby deserved better than starving on a failing homestead." Nathan kept his expression neutral despite the anger bubbling beneath his calm exterior. "That's so. Seems hard on the mother. Women get hysterical," the driver said dismissively. "She'll find another man, have more babies. Meanwhile, this one'll go to some fine family back east. Better life all around. Where's the baby now?" The driver gave him a suspicious look. "Why do you care?" Nathan shrugged. "Just curious. Never seen how that whole process works." After a moment of consideration, the driver relaxed. "Miss Gunderson has him at the hotel. We leave at first light for Westridge. Baby's quiet now, but he screamed something fierce for the first hour. Thought my ears would bleed." Miss Gunderson handles this kind of thing often, Nathan asked, keeping his tone conversational. Been doing it for years. Cold as ice, that one. Says getting attached to the children is a weakness she can't afford. The driver flicked his cigarette away. Speaking of weakness, I need another drink. As the driver turned to head back into the saloon, Nathan made his decision. One more thing, he said quietly. The driver turned, and Nathan's fist connected with his jaw, sending him crumpling to the ground. Nathan caught him before he hit the dirt, dragging him deeper into the shadows. Sorry, friend, Nathan muttered as he bound and gagged the unconscious man with strips torn from the driver's own bandana. But that baby belongs with his mother. Eleanor rode hard until darkness made further travel dangerous. Her mind raced with desperate plans and prayers as she made a small camp in a sheltered draw. She couldn't risk a fire, so she huddled beneath her blanket, tears flowing freely now that there was no one to witness her breakdown. How was Noah without her? Was he crying for her? Did they know how to hold him just right, the way he liked to be rocked? Did they know he couldn't sleep without his small cloth rabbit tucked beside him? The questions tormented her throughout the night, and when the first gray light of dawn appeared, Eleanor was already in the saddle. She knew they would take Noah to Westridge, and she intended to intercept them along the way. As she rode, Eleanor tried to focus on practical matters rather than her fear. The orphanage wagon would likely stop in Clearwater overnight. If she pushed hard, she might reach the town by midday. The sun was high overhead when Eleanor finally saw Clearwater in the distance. She urged Penny forward, despite the horses' obvious fatigue. They had ridden far and fast, and Eleanor knew she was asking too much of her loyal mare, but desperation drove her forward. As she approached the town, Eleanor slowed, suddenly unsure of her next move. She couldn't simply demand her son's return. The law was not on her side, as the morning's events had proven. She needed allies, or at the very least, information. Eleanor led Penny to the livery stable, paying for feed and water from her limited funds. The stable boy, no more than 14, gave her a curious look. "Looking for someone, madam?" he asked as he took her reins. Eleanor hesitated, then decided directness might serve her best. "The orphanage wagon from Westridge. Has it passed through town?" The boy nodded. "Came in yesterday afternoon, staying at the hotel." Eleanor's heart leapt. "They're still here, far as I know, though there was some commotion this morning." Driver was found tied up in the alley behind the saloon, out cold, sheriffs asking questions. Eleanor tried to hide her surprise. Was anyone hurt?" "Nah, just the driver's pride. He's claiming he was robbed, but everyone knows he lost all his money fair and square at the poker table." The boy leaned in conspiratorially. "Between you and me, Miss Gunderson from the orphanage was madder than a wet hen, said they'd be delayed another day because of his foolishness." Another day. Eleanor could scarcely believe her luck. "Thank you," she said, pressing an extra coin into the boy's hand. "Please take good care of my horse. She's had a hard ride." As Eleanor walked toward the hotel, her mind raced. Who had attacked the driver and why? It seemed too coincidental to be unrelated to Noah's taking. Could someone be helping her? The Clearwater Hotel was the largest building in town, a 2-story structure with aspirations of grandeur that fell somewhat short in execution. Eleanor approached cautiously, wondering how she might discover which room held her son. She was so focused on the hotel that she didn't notice the tall man approaching until he spoke. "Mrs. Camden," Eleanor whirled, her hand instinctively moving toward the revolver in her saddlebag, which she had slung over her shoulder. The stranger raised his hands slightly in a gesture of peace. "I'm not here to harm you, madam. My name is Nathan Westfield. I believe I have information about your son." Eleanor studied him warily. He was tall and broad-shouldered, with sun-browned skin that spoke of a life lived outdoors. His eyes were a startling blue beneath the brim of his worn hat, and though his expression was serious, there was a kindness there that gave her pause. "How do you know my name?" she demanded. "And what do you know about my son?" "I was near your property yesterday when they took him," Nathan explained, keeping his voice low. "I followed the wagon here. Your boy is safe for now, but they plan to continue to Westridge as soon as they sort out the trouble with their driver." Eleanor's breath caught. "You're the one who attacked the driver. A small smile tugged at the corner of Nathan's mouth. Let's just say I thought he needed some quiet time to reconsider his life choices. Despite everything, Eleanor found herself fighting a smile of her own. Why would you help us? You don't know me. Nathan's expression grew solemn. I know injustice when I see it, Mrs. Camden, and I know what it means for a child to be taken from his mother. No court order makes that right. For the first time since Noah had been torn from her arms, Eleanor felt a flicker of hope. Can you help me get him back? That's why I'm here, Nathan replied. But we need to move carefully. The law isn't on our side. Eleanor squared her shoulders. I don't care about the law, I care about my son. Nathan nodded approvingly. Then we understand each other. Come with me, I have a plan. Nathan led Eleanor to a small cafe across from the hotel where they could observe the comings and goings while they talked. He ordered coffee for both of them, noting how her hands trembled slightly as she raised the cup to her lips. Your son is on the second floor, third room from the stairs, Nathan told her quietly. Miss Gunderson hasn't left his side except briefly this morning when the sheriff came about the driver. There's also a man named Jenkins who serves as guard and helper. He's armed. Eleanor absorbed this information with remarkable composure. How do we get past them? Not by force, Nathan said firmly. That would put Noah at risk. We need to be smarter. He leaned forward. Tell me about this judge who took your son. What's his interest in your property? Eleanor's expression darkened. Judge Harmon has been trying to buy out every homesteader along Spring Creek for the past year. The railroad's coming through and land values will soar once it does. My husband refused to sell, and after he died. She trailed off, composing herself. I've received offers for less than half what the land is worth. When I refused, suddenly there were tax discrepancies and claims that I wasn't fulfilling homesteading requirements. Nathan nodded thoughtfully. Classic land grab. Unfortunately, it's legal enough on paper to make fighting it directly a challenge. I don't care about the land, Eleanor said firmly. I just want my son back. The land is our leverage, Nathan explained. Judge Harmon wants it badly enough to manufacture reasons to take your child. That means he's desperate, and desperate men make mistakes. Eleanor studied him with new interest. You sound like you've dealt with men like him before. Nathan's mouth tightened. I spent 3 years as a scout for the army, mapping territories for settlement. I've seen how power works out here, who gets the good land, who gets pushed aside. It's rarely about justice. And what do you do now, Mr. Westfield? Call me Nathan, he said. I work for myself these days, tracking, guiding, occasionally delivering messages for people who need discretion. Eleanor sensed there was more to his story, but she focused on the matter at hand. So what's your plan? Nathan outlined his thoughts as they finished their coffee. It was risky, but with no legal recourse available, risk was their only option. As they prepared to leave the cafe, Eleanor suddenly reached across the table and gripped Nathan's hand. Why are you really helping me? The truth, please. Nathan was silent for a long moment, his blue eyes meeting her determined gaze. When I was 8 years old, my mother took ill. My father had died the year before in a mining accident. The authorities decided a sickly woman couldn't raise a boy alone. His voice remained steady, but Eleanor could see the old pain behind his words. I spent 3 years in an orphanage before I ran away. No child should endure that if there's a loving parent who wants them. Eleanor's grip on his hand tightened. I'm sorry that happened to you. It was a long time ago, Nathan said, gently withdrawing his hand. What matters now is getting your son back where he belongs. As they stepped outside, Eleanor looked toward the hotel with renewed determination. Tonight, then, Nathan nodded. Tonight, get some rest if you can. You'll need your strength. The hours crawled by with excruciating slowness for Eleanor. She had taken a room at the small boarding house on the edge of town, but sleep eluded her despite her exhaustion. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw Noah's face as he was torn from her arms. When dusk finally fell, Eleanor changed into the clothes Nathan had procured for her, a plain blue dress that might belong to any respectable woman traveling through town. She pinned her hair neatly and placed a modest bonnet on her head, completing the disguise of a young widow of means rather than a desperate homesteader. Nathan met her behind the boarding house as planned, leading a rented buggy. He had exchanged his trail-worn clothes for a clean shirt and vest that gave him the appearance of a prosperous businessman. "You look the part," he said approvingly as he helped her into the buggy. "As do you," Eleanor replied, noting how the more formal attire suited his strong features. They drove to the hotel in silence, each focused on the task ahead. The plan was simple in concept but fraught with potential complications. Success would depend on timing, confidence, and no small amount of luck. Nathan tied the horse at the hitching post and offered Eleanor his arm as they entered the hotel. They approached the front desk with the easy assurance of people who expected to be accommodated. "Good evening," Nathan said pleasantly to the clerk. "My wife and I require a room for the night. We're traveling to Fort Laramie on business." The clerk, a thin man with spectacles perched on his nose, glanced at his register. "Yes, sir. We have a room available on the second floor. How long will you be staying?" "Just the one night," Nathan replied, signing the register with a flourish as Mr. and Mrs. James Turner of Cheyenne. As the clerk turned to retrieve a key, Nathan and Eleanor exchanged a glance. The first step had gone smoothly. The clerk handed Nathan the key. "Room 204, sir." "Up the stairs and to your right." Nathan thanked him and guided Eleanor toward the stairs. As they ascended, Eleanor whispered, "Third room from the stairs, you said." "Yes, room 207. Nathan kept his voice equally low. "Remember, confidence is everything." They reached the second floor and walked past room 207, noting the closed door. Eleanor's heart pounded so loudly she was certain anyone nearby could hear it. They continued to their assigned room, where Nathan unlocked the door and they slipped inside. Once the door was closed, Eleanor leaned against it, taking deep breaths to steady herself. "Now we wait," Nathan nodded, setting down the small bag he'd brought. "Until things quiet down for the night. Most likely they'll have dinner brought up rather than risk taking the baby to the dining room." Eleanor paced the small room, unable to remain still. "What if they check on us? What if someone recognizes me? The clerk has probably already forgotten our faces," Nathan assured her, "and we've given him no reason to be suspicious. As far as he's concerned, we're just another couple passing through." The word couple hung in the air between them, drawing Eleanor's attention to the single bed that dominated the small room. Nathan seemed to notice her discomfort. "I'll keep watch from the chair," he said, moving a wooden chair near the window where he could observe the street below. Eleanor nodded gratefully and sat on the edge of the bed. "Tell me more about your plan for when we do have Noah," she said. "Where can we go that they won't find us?" "I have friends among the Lakota," Nathan explained. "My time with the army wasn't always comfortable. I disagreed with how the native people were treated. I made some allies who might help us, at least temporarily." "The Lakota," Eleanor couldn't hide her surprise. Relations between settlers and the indigenous tribes remained tense throughout the territory. "Not all of them welcome white faces," Nathan acknowledged. "But there are those who judge a person by their actions, not their origins. I've earned some trust." Eleanor studied him with new appreciation. Nathan Westfield was clearly a man who charted his own course, regardless of what others might think. "And after that?" she asked. "I can't hide forever, especially with a child." Nathan's expression grew thoughtful. "There's talk of amnesty for homesteaders who were unfairly dispossessed. The new territorial governor is less corrupt than his predecessor. With the right documentation of what happened to you, you might be able to reclaim your land legally." "Documentation?" Eleanor asked. Nathan smiled slightly. "I took the liberty of borrowing some papers from the driver's satchel, including communication between Judge Harmon and the railroad company that suggests impropriety in your case." Eleanor stared at him in astonishment. "You're quite thorough for someone who decided to help on impulse." "Once I commit to something, I see it through," Nathan said simply. The hours passed slowly as they waited for the hotel to settle for the night. They spoke in quiet tones, sharing pieces of their lives. Eleanor told him about meeting her husband Thomas at a county fair, their dreams of building a life together on the frontier, and the devastating fever that had taken him just months after Noah's birth. In turn, Nathan spoke of his years after the orphanage, working on ranches as a boy, joining the army as a scout when he was barely 18, and eventually striking out on his own when military life became too restrictive for his sense of justice. "I deliver messages now," he explained. "Between settlements, mining camps, ranches, people trust me with information they wouldn't put in writing for just anyone to carry." "Is that what brought you to my area?" Eleanor asked. Nathan nodded. "I was delivering news of a silver strike to a man in Clearwater." "Pure chance that I was passing your homestead when I was." "Providence, perhaps," Eleanor suggested softly, "not chance." Their eyes met in the dim light of the single lamp, and something unspoken passed between them, a recognition of the strange circumstances that had brought them together, and the unexpected understanding they'd found. The moment was broken by the sound of a door opening and closing in the hallway, followed by footsteps passing their room. Nathan moved silently to the door, opening it just enough to peer out. "Miss Gunderson," he whispered, heading downstairs. Eleanor was immediately on her feet. "This is our chance." Nathan held up a hand. "Wait, Jenkins might still be in the room. Let me check." He slipped out into the hallway, leaving Eleanor alone with her racing thoughts. The minutes stretched endlessly until he returned, excitement evident in his eyes. "Jenkins went with her. I heard them talking about getting dinner. The room is unattended." He reached into his pocket and produced a slender metal tool. "And I can deal with the lock." Eleanor didn't ask where he had learned such skills. All that mattered was that they might work in her favor now. They moved quickly down the hallway to room 207. Nathan worked on the lock while Eleanor kept watch, her heart threatening to pound its way out of her chest. After what seemed an eternity but was likely less than a minute, there was a soft click. "Got it," Nathan whispered, turning the handle and pushing the door open. Eleanor followed him into the darkened room, holding her breath. Her eyes adjusted to the dim light coming through the window, and she saw a small traveling bassinet set up near the bed. She rushed to it, tears filling her eyes as she saw her son sleeping peacefully, his tiny fists curled beside his face. "Noah," she breathed, reaching for him with trembling hands. The baby stirred as she lifted him, his eyes fluttering open. For a terrifying moment, Eleanor thought he might cry out, but he simply stared at her face in the darkness. Then, in a moment that nearly broke her heart with joy, he smiled in recognition. "He knows me," she whispered to Nathan, who was keeping watch at the door. "Of course he does," Nathan replied softly. "You're his mother. Now we need to move quickly." Eleanor wrapped Noah securely in his blanket and followed Nathan into the hallway. They returned to their room long enough to collect their few belongings, then made their way toward the back stairs that Nathan had scouted earlier. They had just reached the bottom of the stairs when they heard a woman's voice raised in alarm from above. Miss Gunderson had returned to find her charge missing. "Run," Nathan urged, taking Eleanor's elbow and guiding her toward the back door of the hotel. They emerged into the alley behind the building, moving swiftly toward where Nathan had left a second horse tethered, a precaution that now proved its worth as shouts echoed from the hotel. "Can you ride while holding him?" Nathan asked as he untied the horse. Eleanor nodded firmly. "I've done it before." Nathan helped her mount, making sure she had Noah secured against her chest, then swung up onto his own horse that was waiting nearby. "Stay close to me," he instructed as they rode away from the hotel, keeping to back streets to avoid immediate detection. The alarm was spreading through the small town, and they could hear the sheriff shouting orders to search the roads. But Nathan led them away from the main routes, following a barely visible trail that skirted the edge of town. "Where are we going?" Eleanor called softly as they rode. "North," Nathan replied. "There's a place in the hills where we can rest safely until daylight, then we'll head for the Dakota settlement I told you about." Eleanor held Noah close, feeling his steady breathing against her chest. Whatever came next, she had her son back in her arms. For the moment, that was enough. They rode through the night, stopping only when necessary to rest the horses or tend to Noah's needs. Eleanor was exhausted but exhilarated, the weight of her son in her arms worth every ache in her body. Nathan proved to be an expert guide, leading them through terrain that would confuse any pursuers. By dawn, they had reached a sheltered canyon where a small stream provided fresh water. "We can rest here for a few hours," Nathan said as he helped Eleanor dismount. No one will find this place unless they know exactly where to look. Eleanor sank gratefully onto a flat rock, adjusting Noah in her arms. The baby was remarkably content despite the difficult journey, as if he understood they were escaping to safety. "Are you hungry?" Nathan asked, offering her some jerky and hardtack from his saddlebag. Eleanor accepted gratefully. "I need to feed Noah soon. He must be starving, poor thing." Nathan turned away discreetly as Eleanor nursed her son. She appreciated his respectful behavior, another sign of the thoughtful man beneath the rugged exterior. "How far to your Lakota friends?" she asked as she adjusted her clothing afterward. "Another day's ride," Nathan replied, returning to sit nearby. "Maybe less if the horses hold up well. My friend Gray Hawk leads a small band that broke away from the main tribe. They prefer to avoid conflict with white settlers when possible, living in the hills where few venture." Eleanor studied him curiously. "And they'll welcome us." "They'll welcome you because I ask it," Nathan said confidently. "I once saved Gray Hawk's son from soldiers who accused him of stealing. The boy was innocent, but that wouldn't have mattered to some." Noah had fallen asleep again, and Eleanor gently placed him on her bedroll, covering him with a blanket. She moved to sit beside Nathan, suddenly aware of how much her life had changed in just 2 days. "I don't know how to thank you," she said softly. "You risked everything for strangers." Nathan's blue eyes met hers. "You're not strangers anymore, and some things are worth the risk." The simple statement carried a weight that made Eleanor's heart beat faster. She looked away, uncertain of the feelings stirring within her. This was no time for such thoughts, she told herself firmly. Her focus needed to remain on Noah's safety. "We should try to sleep," Nathan suggested. "I'll take first watch." Eleanor nodded and returned to her bedroll beside Noah. Despite her exhaustion, sleep came fitfully, her mind replaying the events of the past days and wondering what the future might hold. When she woke, the sun was high overhead. Nathan was sitting nearby, whittling a small piece of wood with his knife. "What are you making?" she asked, sitting up carefully to avoid disturbing Noah. Nathan looked almost embarrassed. "A rabbit. I noticed he didn't have any toys with him." Eleanor's throat tightened with emotion. "His cloth rabbit was left behind at the homestead. He can't sleep without it." "Well, this one's not quite ready yet," Nathan said, showing her the rough shape emerging from the wood. "But it might do until we can get the original back." The simple kindness of the gesture moved Eleanor deeply. "You're a good man, Nathan Westfield," he shrugged, uncomfortable with the praise. "We should get moving soon. How's the little one doing?" As if responding to his name, Noah stirred and opened his eyes. Eleanor lifted him, checking his diaper and then holding him up for Nathan to see. "Nathan, meet Noah Camden. Noah, this is Mr. Westfield, who helped bring us back together." Nathan's face softened as he looked at the baby, who regarded him solemnly before breaking into a toothless smile. "He has your eyes," Nathan observed, "and his father's chin," Eleanor added, a brief sadness crossing her features. Nathan nodded respectfully. "He would be proud of how you fought for your son." They prepared to continue their journey, packing their few belongings and mounting the horses once more. Eleanor felt stronger than she had the previous day, bolstered by Noah's presence and Nathan's steady support. As they rode, Eleanor found herself studying Nathan's profile against the vast landscape. He sat tall in the saddle, his eyes constantly scanning the horizon for any sign of danger. There was a quiet competence about him that inspired confidence, yet also a gentleness she hadn't expected from a man who had clearly lived a hard life. By late afternoon, the terrain had changed, becoming more rugged as they entered the foothills. Nathan led them along game trails that would have been invisible to less experienced eyes. "Not far now," he said as they paused to water the horses at a small spring. "We should reach Gray Hawk's camp before nightfall." Eleanor adjusted Noah, who had begun to fuss. "I hope they truly won't mind our presence." "Gray Hawk understands the importance of family," Nathan assured her, "and his wife, Morning Sky, has a soft spot for children." They continued their journey as the sun began its descent toward the western horizon. Nathan grew more alert, occasionally stopping to listen or examine marks on the ground that Eleanor couldn't discern. Finally, as twilight gathered, Nathan raised his hand. "We're being watched," he said quietly. Eleanor tensed, instinctively holding Noah closer. By whom? Scouts from the camp, Nathan replied. It's a good sign, it means we're close. He called out something in a language Eleanor didn't understand, his voice carrying across the quiet landscape. After a moment of silence, an answering call came from the rocks above them. Two figures emerged from the gathering shadows, men dressed in a mixture of traditional Lakota clothing and items acquired from white traders. They approached cautiously, their expressions guarded until they recognized Nathan. The older of the two broke into a smile, stepping forward to clasp Nathan's arm in greeting. They exchanged words in the Lakota language before Nathan turned to Eleanor. This is Swift Deer, Gray Hawk's nephew, he explained. He says we are welcome to enter their camp. Eleanor nodded respectfully to the Lakota men, who regarded her and Noah with undisguised curiosity. Swift Deer said something to Nathan, gesturing toward the baby. Nathan smiled. He says the child has strong spirits watching over him to have found his way back to his mother. Please thank him, Eleanor said, and tell him I'm grateful for their welcome. As Nathan translated, the younger Lakota man stepped forward, offering to lead Eleanor's horse. She accepted with a grateful smile, too tired to feel anything but relief at having reached a place of safety. They followed their guides up a narrow trail that wound between towering rocks. As they rounded a final bend, a small encampment came into view, nestled in a protected valley with a stream running through its center. Several tipis stood in a semicircle, with cooking fires burning before them. Their arrival caused immediate interest, with women and children emerging to watch as Swift Deer led them toward the largest tipi in the center of the camp. A man of about 50, his long black hair streaked with gray, stood waiting for them. Gray Hawk, Nathan said as he dismounted, approaching the man with obvious respect. They spoke for several minutes while Eleanor waited, conscious of the many eyes watching her. Finally, Nathan turned to her. Gray Hawk extends the protection of his camp to you and your son, he said. You'll stay in the tipi of his sister, who recently lost her husband. She welcomes the company. Eleanor dismounted carefully, keeping Noah secure in her arms. Please convey my deepest thanks, she said to Nathan, who translated her words. Gray Hawk nodded solemnly, then spoke again. Nathan listened before turning back to Eleanor. He says a mother and child should never be separated by men who speak with forked tongues. The spirits will bring justice to those who have wronged you. Eleanor felt tears well in her eyes at the unexpected compassion. Thank you, she said simply, looking directly at Gray Hawk. The Lakota leader seemed to understand even without translation, giving her a small nod before speaking to a middle-aged woman who had approached. She stepped forward, smiling gently at Eleanor. This is White Birch, Gray Hawk's sister, Nathan explained. She'll show you where you can rest. Eleanor hesitated, suddenly reluctant to part from Nathan after all they had been through together. Will you be nearby? Nathan nodded reassuringly. I'll be staying in Gray Hawk's tipi just across the way. You're safe here, Eleanor. Rest well. As White Birch led her toward a tipi at the edge of the camp, Eleanor glanced back to see Nathan deep in conversation with Gray Hawk. Whatever lay ahead, she knew with certainty that Nathan Westfield would keep his promise to help her and Noah find their way home. The days at the Lakota camp settled into an unexpected rhythm of peace. Eleanor had feared she would feel like an intruder, but White Birch and the other women welcomed her with a quiet acceptance that required no common language to convey. Noah thrived in the camp environment, fascinated by the new sights and sounds. The Lakota children were particularly taken with him, bringing small gifts of feathers and pretty stones to place beside his sleeping pallet. Nathan divided his time between consulting with Gray Hawk and spending hours with Eleanor, translating when needed and helping her understand the customs of their hosts. They often sat together in the evenings, watching Noah play on a blanket while discussing their next steps. The territorial governor will be in Fort Laramie next month, Nathan explained on their third evening in the camp. If we can present our evidence directly to him, bypassing Judge Harmon's influence, you might have a chance at justice. Eleanor nodded thoughtfully. And in the meantime, we stay here, where you're safe, Nathan said. I've sent a message to a friend in Clearwater who will let us know when the search dies down. Eleanor watched as Noah batted at a small deerskin ball a Lakota child had given him. I never imagined finding safety among people I was taught to fear, she admitted. My father spoke of the Lakota only as a threat to settlers. Most people fear what they don't understand, Nathan said. On both sides of this conflict, there are good people who want peace and bad people who profit from hatred. Like you and Judge Harmon, Eleanor observed. Nathan smiled wryly. I wouldn't presume to be the opposite of Judge Harmon in all things, but I try to see people as individuals, not as parts of a group to be judged as one. It's a rare quality, Eleanor said softly, meeting his eyes in the fading light, especially out here. The moment stretched between them, filled with unspoken possibilities. Then Noah squealed, demanding attention, and the moment passed. Yet Eleanor found such moments occurring more frequently as days turned into a week, then two. She began to recognize the signs, the way Nathan's eyes lingered on her when he thought she wasn't looking, the careful distance he maintained even as they grew closer in other ways. For her part, Eleanor was surprised by the strength of her feelings. It seemed impossible that in the midst of such upheaval, her heart could find room for anything beyond concern for Noah's safety. Yet each day, she found herself looking forward to Nathan's company with an eagerness that couldn't be explained by mere gratitude. On their 10th day in the camp, Nathan suggested they take a walk along the stream while White Birch watched Noah. "There's something I'd like to show you," he said mysteriously. They followed the stream up into the hills, Nathan occasionally offering his hand to help Eleanor over difficult terrain. Each touch sent a current of awareness through her that was becoming increasingly difficult to ignore. Finally, they reached a small plateau overlooking the valley. The view stretched for miles, the rolling hills giving way to distant plains that shimmered in the afternoon sun. "It's beautiful," Eleanor breathed, taking in the vast landscape. "Gray Hawk calls this the place of far seeing," Nathan said, standing beside her. "He brought me here when I first came to them, injured and hunted by men who didn't appreciate my interference in their plans." Eleanor turned to him in surprise. "You never mentioned being injured," Nathan shrugged. "It was a long time ago, a bullet grazed, nothing serious. But it taught me the value of having friends in unexpected places." Eleanor studied him in the clear light. "You're a puzzle, Nathan Westfield. Just when I think I understand you, you reveal another piece of your story." "Not much of a story," he said, looking out over the landscape rather than meeting her eyes. "Just a man trying to find his place in a changing world. Is that why you help people like me, to find your place?" Nathan considered her question seriously. "Maybe, or maybe it's simpler than that. Maybe I just believe that people deserve better than what this frontier often offers them." Eleanor moved closer to him, her shoulder nearly touching his. "And what do you believe you deserve, Nathan?" He looked down at her then, his blue eyes intense. "I've never given it much thought." "Perhaps you should," Eleanor said softly. The air between them seemed to still, the only sound the distant call of a hawk circling above. Nathan's gaze dropped to her lips, and Eleanor felt her heart quicken in response. Slowly, giving her every chance to pull away, Nathan lowered his head until his lips met hers. The kiss was gentle, almost hesitant, a question rather than a demand. Eleanor answered by lifting her hand to his cheek, the slight roughness of his beard against her palm, anchoring this moment in reality. This was no dream or desperate fantasy. This was Nathan, solid and real, his mouth warm against hers. When they finally parted, Nathan rested his forehead against hers. "I've wanted to do that since Clearwater," he admitted. Eleanor smiled. "Even when I was half wild with fear and grief, especially then," he said. "Your strength is breathtaking." She pulled back slightly to see his face. "What happens now?" Nathan took her hands in his. "That depends on what you want, Eleanor. My feelings are clear, but your life has been turned upside down. The last thing you need is pressure from me." The honesty of his words confirmed what Eleanor already knew about this man. He would always put her needs before his own desires. "What I want," she said carefully, "is to secure Noah's future, to find a place where we can be safe and build a life." She squeezed his hands. "But I'm beginning to think that place might be wherever you are." The smile that transformed Nathan's face made Eleanor's breath catch. It was like watching the sun break through clouds, illuminating all the warmth and goodness she had sensed in him from the beginning. "I can't offer much," he warned. "I have some savings, but my life has never been settled." "Perhaps it's time for both of us to find settlement," Eleanor suggested. "Together." Nathan kissed her again, this time with more certainty, his arms encircling her waist to draw her closer. Eleanor leaned into him, feeling for the first time since Thomas's death that the future might hold more than mere survival. As they walked back to the camp hand in hand, Eleanor knew challenges still lay ahead. Judge Harmon and his allies wouldn't easily surrender their plans. But with Nathan beside her, those challenges no longer seemed insurmountable. The messenger arrived 3 days later, a young Lakota man who had been trading in Clearwater. He brought word that the search for Eleanor and Noah had expanded, with bounty hunters now joining the sheriff's men. "Judge Harmon is claiming you kidnapped the child from legal custody," Nathan translated as Gray Hawk relayed the news. "He's offering $50 for information leading to your capture." Eleanor held Noah tighter. "He's that determined to have my land." "It's not just about the land anymore," Nathan said grimly. "It's about his pride. You've defied him publicly, and men like Harmon can't tolerate that." Gray Hawk spoke again, his expression serious. Nathan listened intently before turning to Eleanor. "He says we should leave for Fort Laramie sooner than planned. The governor has arrived early for a meeting with tribal representatives. This might be our best chance to present our case." Eleanor nodded, trying to hide her fear. "How soon?" "Tomorrow at dawn," Nathan replied. "Gray Hawk will send 2 of his men to guide us through the back country. It will take longer, but keep us away from the main roads where bounty hunters might be watching." That evening, the camp held a small ceremony to wish them safe journey. White Birch presented Eleanor with a beautifully beaded pouch for Noah's few belongings, while Gray Hawk gave Nathan a medicine bundle for protection. As the camp settled for the night, Eleanor sat with Nathan outside White Birch's tipi, Noah sleeping peacefully inside. The stars spread across the sky in breathtaking profusion, reminding Eleanor of how small their troubles were in the grand scheme of creation. "Are you afraid?" Nathan asked quietly, his arm around her shoulders. Eleanor considered the question honestly. "Yes, but not like before. Before I was afraid because I felt so alone. Now," she leaned into his embrace. "Now I'm afraid, but not without hope." Nathan pressed a kiss to her temple. "We'll face whatever comes together, I promise you that." "I believe you," Eleanor said simply. They sat in comfortable silence for a time, each lost in their own thoughts about the journey ahead. Finally, Eleanor voiced the question that had been on her mind. "If we succeed, if the governor overturns Judge Harmon's rulings, what then? Will you stay with us?" Nathan turned to face her fully. "Eleanor, if you'll have me, I'll stay with you whether we succeed or fail. These past weeks have shown me what I've been searching for all these years without realizing it." "And what's that?" she asked, though she thought she knew the answer. "Family," he said. "A place to belong that isn't defined by land or borders, but by the people who matter most." Eleanor touched his face gently. "You've become that for us, you know. Noah watches for you every morning. His face lights up when you enter the tipi." "He's an easy child to love," Nathan said, his voice rough with emotion. "As is his mother." The word hung between them, neither needing to elaborate on its meaning. What had begun as an impulsive act of justice had grown into something neither had anticipated but both now treasured. "We should rest," Eleanor said finally. "Dawn will come quickly." Nathan nodded, reluctantly releasing her. "I'll meet you here before first light." As Eleanor settled beside Noah in the tipi, she found herself praying not just for their safety on the journey ahead, but in gratitude for the unexpected gift of Nathan Westfield in their lives. Whatever happened at Fort Laramie, she knew their future had been irrevocably changed by the cowboy who had ridden after the wagon and hadn't stopped. The journey to Fort Laramie took 4 days of careful travel through rugged country. The Lakota guides, Running Fox and Black Crow, led them along hidden trails that even Nathan, with his extensive knowledge of the territory, had never traversed. Noah proved to be a remarkably good traveler, content to be carried in a cradleboard that White Birch had fashioned for him. The traditional Lakota baby carrier kept him secure against Eleanor's chest or back, leaving her hands free when needed. On the evening of the fourth day, they crested a hill to see Fort Laramie in the distance, its buildings glowing in the setting sun. The Lakota guides would go no further, having a justified wariness of the military outpost. "Thank them for their help," Eleanor said to Nathan as they prepared to part ways. "Tell them they will always be welcome wherever Noah and I make our home." After Nathan translated, Running Fox stepped forward and placed a small leather amulet in Eleanor's hand. "For the child," Nathan explained, "a protection charm." Eleanor thanked him sincerely, carefully tucking the gift into Noah's cradle board. The guides melted back into the landscape with a silent efficiency that still amazed her, leaving Nathan and Eleanor to approach the fort alone. "We'll wait until morning," Nathan decided, finding a sheltered spot to make camp. Better to approach in daylight when the governor will be conducting business. That night, they spoke little, each aware of the risks that lay ahead. Eleanor tended to Noah while Nathan prepared a small fire, enough for warmth but not so large as to attract attention. "Do you think they'll listen?" Eleanor asked as they shared a simple meal. "The governor has a reputation for fairness," Nathan replied, "and the documents we have are compelling. Judge Harmon was careless in his greed, leaving a clear trail of his intentions regarding your land." Eleanor looked down at Noah, who was contentedly chewing on the wooden rabbit Nathan had finished carving during their time at the Lakota camp. "And if they don't listen," Nathan's expression grew determined, "then we find another way. Canada, perhaps, or California. Somewhere beyond Harmon's reach where we can start fresh." The casual "we" in his statement warmed Eleanor's heart despite her anxiety. Whatever happened, they would face it as a family. They reached Fort Laramie just after sunrise, Nathan riding ahead to scout the situation while Eleanor followed at a distance with Noah. The fort was busier than usual, with various tribal representatives present for the talks with the governor. Nathan returned with cautiously good news. "The governor is holding public audiences this morning. Anyone with business can request a hearing." "Will they let us in?" Eleanor asked, eyeing the guards at the gate. "I have a friend here, Captain Miller. He owes me a favor from my army days. He'll make sure we get our moment with the governor." Eleanor adjusted her shawl, making sure Noah was properly covered. "Then let's not waste any time." They approached the fort together, Nathan speaking briefly with the guards before they were allowed to pass. Inside, the parade ground was crowded with soldiers, civilians, and tribal representatives moving purposefully between buildings. Nathan led them to the commandant's office, where Captain Miller, a tall man with a neatly trimmed beard, greeted them warmly. "Westfield. Didn't expect to see you in these parts again." His eyes moved curiously to Eleanor and Noah. "It's a long story, James," Nathan said. "One I'd like the governor to hear directly. Is that possible?" Captain Miller studied them thoughtfully. "He's seeing petitioners in the meeting hall right now." "I can get you in, but I can't guarantee he'll listen." "That's all we ask," Eleanor said. The captain nodded. "Follow me." He led them across the parade ground to a large building where a line of people waited to present their cases. Using his rank, Captain Miller escorted them past the line to speak quietly with an aide at the door. "The governor will see you after the current petitioner," he informed them, stepping back. "Good luck, Westfield. I hope whatever brings you here is resolved favorably." Nathan clasped his hand gratefully. "Thank you, James. I owe you another one. Just name your firstborn after me and we'll call it even," the captain replied with a wink that made Eleanor blush. As they waited, Eleanor tried to calm her racing heart. Noah, sensing her tension, began to fuss in his cradle board. "Shall I take him?" Nathan offered, his hands already reaching for the baby. Eleanor transferred Noah to Nathan's arms, watching as he bounced the child gently, whispering soothing words that immediately calmed him. The sight of the tall cowboy cradling her son with such natural tenderness nearly undid her composure. "Mrs. Camden and Mr. Westfield," the aide called from the doorway. "The governor will see you now." Taking a deep breath, Eleanor reclaimed Noah and followed Nathan into the meeting hall. At the far end, seated behind a large desk, was Governor John Pennington, a distinguished man in his 50s whose reputation for fairness had given them this slim hope. "Good morning," the governor said as they approached. "Captain Miller speaks highly of you, Mr. Westfield. He says your matter is urgent." "Thank you for seeing us, Governor," Nathan replied respectfully. "We've come regarding a grave injustice perpetrated by Judge Elliot Harmon of Clearwater County." The governor's eyebrows rose slightly. "Judge Harmon, I know him. A well-respected jurist, by all accounts." "With respect, sir, his reputation is undeserved," Nathan said firmly. "He has been using his position to force homesteaders off their land for the benefit of the railroad, in which he holds significant interests." Governor Pennington leaned back in his chair, his expression skeptical but attentive. "That's a serious accusation, Mr. Westfield. I assume you have evidence?" "Yes, sir." Nathan produced the documents he had taken from the driver's satchel, laying them carefully on the desk. These communications between Judge Harmon and railroad representatives detail their arrangement. The judge identifies promising properties, manufactures legal reasons to dispossess the owners, and then acquires the land at reduced prices before selling to the railroad at a profit. The governor examined the papers with growing concern. "And how does Mrs. Camden figure in this?" he asked, looking at Eleanor. Eleanor stepped forward, adjusting Noah in her arms. "Governor Pennington, my husband Thomas homesteaded land along Spring Creek. After his death last winter, Judge Harmon repeatedly tried to purchase our property. When I refused to sell, he suddenly discovered tax discrepancies and claimed I wasn't fulfilling homesteading requirements." Her voice remained steady as she continued. "3 weeks ago, he arrived at my home with Sheriff Dobbs and declared that, as a widow, I was unfit to raise my son. They took Noah from my arms and placed him with the Territorial Orphanage for adoption by a suitable family." The governor's expression darkened. "And the child with you now is my son," Eleanor confirmed. "Mr. Westfield witnessed the taking and helped me reclaim him before he could be sent away." "Technically breaking the law in the process," the governor observed, though his tone suggested he wasn't entirely disapproving. "Yes, sir," Nathan acknowledged. "But when the law is corrupted to serve personal greed, sometimes justice must find another path." Governor Pennington was silent for a long moment, studying the documents before him. Finally, he looked up at them. "Mrs. Camden, I believe your account. These papers certainly suggest impropriety on Judge Harmon's part." He sighed heavily. "Unfortunately, the situation is complicated by the fact that you did, in fact, take the child from legal custody, regardless of how unjustly that custody was obtained." Eleanor's heart sank, but the governor wasn't finished. "However, I cannot in good conscience separate a mother from her child based on such questionable proceedings." He reached for pen and paper. "I am issuing an executive order temporarily suspending Judge Harmon's ruling regarding your son pending a full investigation into these allegations." Relief flooded through Eleanor, making her knees weak. Nathan's hand found her elbow, steadying her. "As for your land," the governor continued, "I cannot immediately restore your title, but I can place a stay on any transfer or sale until the investigation is complete. If Judge Harmon is found to have acted improperly, all his rulings in similar cases will be reviewed." "Thank you, Governor," Eleanor said, her voice thick with emotion. "That's more than we dared hope for." Governor Pennington signed the order with a flourish and handed it to Nathan. "This should protect you from immediate legal repercussions. I suggest you return to Clearwater and present it to Sheriff Dobbs directly." As they turned to leave, the governor added, "Mr. Westfield, your reputation for unorthodox methods precedes you. In this case, it seems your intervention was warranted. But I recommend you consider more conventional approaches in the future." Nathan smiled slightly. "I'll take that under advisement, sir." Outside the meeting hall, Eleanor could no longer contain her emotions. Tears streamed down her face as she looked at Nathan. "We did it," she whispered. "He believed us." Nathan drew her and Noah into an embrace, mindful of the baby between them. "You did it, Eleanor. Your courage brought us here." She shook her head. "I would never have made it without you." For a moment they stood together, a family forged in adversity but bound now by something much stronger. Then, with the governor's order safely tucked away, they began planning their return to Clearwater and whatever future awaited them there. The journey back to Clearwater was made without the need for secrecy that had marked their flight. With the governor's order providing legal protection, they traveled openly, stopping at farms and trading posts along the way. Eleanor marveled at how different everything looked through the lens of hope, rather than fear. The rolling hills and vast skies of the Dakota Territory had never seemed more beautiful, perhaps because she now saw them as the backdrop for a future she hadn't dared imagine just weeks before. They arrived in Clearwater on a quiet Sunday afternoon, the town's single street nearly deserted as most citizens attended church services. Nathan suggested they go directly to the sheriff's office, preferring to present the governor's order before word of their return could spread. Sheriff Dobbs was alone in his office, his boots propped on his desk as he dozed in his chair. The sound of the door opening startled him awake, his hand moving instinctively to his gun until recognition dawned. "Mrs. Camden," he said, rising slowly. "You've caused quite a stir, disappearing with that child." His eyes shifted to Nathan. "And you must be the mysterious abductor folks have been talking about." "Nathan Westfield," Nathan replied evenly. "And there was no abduction, Sheriff. The child was illegally taken from his mother." Sheriff Dobbs scowled. "I was enforcing a court order, plain and simple. An order based on corruption and personal gain," Eleanor said, stepping forward. "Governor Pennington agrees." Nathan handed the sheriff the governor's order. "This suspends Judge Harmon's ruling regarding Noah Camden and places a stay on any transfer of the Camden property pending investigation." Sheriff Dobbs read the document slowly, his expression souring. "This seems in order," he admitted reluctantly. "But Judge Harmon won't take this lying down." "That's his concern," Nathan said firmly. "Ours is ensuring that Mrs. Camden and her son can return to their home without further interference." The sheriff regarded them thoughtfully. "Judge is out of town until Tuesday, went to Bismarck on business." He handed the order back to Nathan. "I suggest you get settled back at your place before he returns, Mrs. Camden. Once he sees this, there's likely to be trouble of some kind." Eleanor nodded, surprised by the sheriff's candor. "Thank you for the warning, Sheriff Dobbs." As they turned to leave, the sheriff called after them. "Westfield, a word of advice. Judge Harmon has friends in high places. Be careful." Nathan acknowledged the warning with a nod. "Much obliged, Sheriff." They left the office and headed toward the livery to retrieve Penny, who had been cared for in Eleanor's absence. The stable boy greeted them with wide-eyed surprise. "Mrs. Camden, everyone said you'd run off." "Not exactly, Tommy," Eleanor replied with a smile. "But I'm back now. How's Penny doing?" "Right as rain, madam. Been exercising her regular like you paid for." As Tommy went to fetch the mare, Nathan turned to Eleanor. "We should gather supplies before heading to your homestead. No telling what condition it will be in after 3 weeks." Eleanor nodded in agreement. "The general store should be open after church lets out." They passed the next hour making preparations, purchasing food and necessities for the farm. Eleanor was surprised by how normal it felt to be back in Clearwater, as if her world hadn't been completely upended and then reassembled in new patterns during her absence. By late afternoon, they were on the road to the Camden homestead, Eleanor riding Penny with Noah secure in his cradle board and Nathan beside them on Rusty. As they crested the final hill, Eleanor's heart clenched at the sight of her home in the distance. "It looks unchanged," she said with surprise. "What did you expect?" Nathan asked. Eleanor shrugged. "I don't know. In my mind, everything was different after they took Noah. I thought the place itself might somehow reflect that." They approached the cabin cautiously, but all was quiet. The door had been repaired since the forceful entry by the sheriff, and when Eleanor stepped inside, she found the interior relatively undisturbed. "Someone's been here," she noted, seeing that the dust had been disturbed in patterns that suggested inspection rather than habitation. "Probably assessing the property for sale," Nathan said grimly, "but they won't be doing that now." Eleanor moved through the cabin, reacquainting herself with the home she had thought she might never see again. She found Noah's cloth rabbit tucked under his small blanket in the cradle, exactly where she had left it. "Look, Noah," she said softly, holding up the toy. "Your friend was waiting for you." The baby grabbed for the rabbit with a squeal of delight that brought tears to Eleanor's eyes. Such a small thing to bring such joy. Nathan brought in their supplies and the bags from their journey, setting them on the table. "I'll check the barn and outbuildings," he said. "Make sure everything's secure." While he was gone, Eleanor changed Noah and settled him in his cradle with both rabbits, the cloth one from home and the wooden one Nathan had carved. Then she began the process of reclaiming her space, sweeping floors and opening windows to let fresh air replace the stale emptiness. When Nathan returned, his expression was serious. "The livestock is gone," he reported. "Your chickens, the milk cow, everything, they must have been sold off after you left." Eleanor nodded, having expected as much. "We'll rebuild," she said simply. "The important things are back where they belong." Nathan hesitated in the doorway, suddenly uncertain in a way Eleanor hadn't seen before. "I should probably make camp outside," he said, "now that you're home safe." Eleanor set down her broom and crossed to him, taking his hands in hers. "Nathan Westfield, don't you dare think of sleeping anywhere but here," she said firmly. "This is your home too now if you want it to be." The relief and joy that crossed his face made Eleanor's heart swell. "I want that more than anything," he admitted, "but I didn't want to presume." Eleanor rose on tiptoes to kiss him softly. "Presume away, cowboy. You rode after that wagon and didn't stop until you'd brought us home. That kind of dedication deserves some presumption." Nathan laughed, wrapping his arms around her waist. "Is that so?" "It is," she confirmed, resting her head against his chest. "Though I suppose we should make it official at some point for propriety's sake." "Eleanor Camden," Nathan said, lifting her chin so their eyes met. "Are you proposing marriage to me?" "I believe I am," she replied with a smile. "Unless you'd rather do the asking," Nathan's expression grew serious. "I never thought I'd have a family of my own. My life hasn't been the kind that lends itself to settling down, but you and Noah have changed everything for me." He took a deep breath. "So yes, Eleanor Camden, I would be honored to marry you if you'll have a wandering cowboy for a husband." "I think your wandering days are over," Eleanor said softly. "As are mine. We've found where we belong." Their kiss was a promise, sealed in the home they would share as the sun set over the Dakota Territory, painting the land in shades of gold and promise. The confrontation they had anticipated came sooner than expected. Judge Harmon returned to Clearwater the very next day, having been summoned by telegraph about the governor's order. Eleanor was hanging laundry in the yard when the cloud of dust on the horizon announced approaching riders. Nathan was repairing the chicken coop in preparation for new birds they planned to purchase, and he immediately moved to Eleanor's side. "Take Noah inside," he said quietly. "I'll deal with this." Eleanor nodded, retrieving Noah from his blanket on the grass and hurrying into the cabin. Through the window, she watched as Judge Harmon, Sheriff Dobbs, and two other men she recognized as the judge's business associates rode into the yard. Judge Harmon dismounted first, his face flushed with anger. "Westfield," he spat. "I should have known you were behind this. Interfering where you don't belong." Nathan stood his ground, one hand resting casually near his holstered pistol. "Judge Harmon, I assume you've seen the governor's order." "A temporary measure based on lies and stolen documents," the judge retorted. "It won't stand once I present my side of the story." "The documents speak for themselves," Nathan replied evenly. "Your arrangement with the railroad is quite clear." Sheriff Dobbs dismounted more slowly, looking uncomfortable. "Judge, maybe we should discuss this in town, legal-like." Judge Harmon ignored him, his gaze fixed on Nathan. "You've made a powerful enemy, Westfield. This territory isn't big enough for men who don't respect the law." "I have the utmost respect for the law, Judge," Nathan said. "It's men who twist it to their own ends that I take issue with." Eleanor stepped onto the porch, unable to remain hidden while Nathan faced their adversaries alone. "Judge Harmon, you took my son because I wouldn't sell you my land. That's the simple truth, and no amount of legal maneuvering can disguise it." The judge turned his cold gaze on her. "Mrs. Camden. Still determined to ruin yourself, I see. A woman alone can't maintain a homestead claim, as the court has already determined." "She's not alone," Nathan said firmly. Judge Harmon's eyes narrowed as he looked between them, understanding dawning. "I see. Found yourself a protector, have you, Mrs. Camden? How convenient." "Found myself a partner," Eleanor corrected. "Mr. Westfield and I are to be married." The announcement clearly took the judge by surprise. His momentary silence was broken by one of his associates. Elliot, if they marry, her claim becomes legally sound again. The Homestead Act allows for a woman's husband to assume the claim. Judge Harmon's face darkened further. This changes nothing. The investigation will reveal these accusations as the desperate fabrications they are. And when it does, I'll see both of you prosecuted for kidnapping and interference with justice. We'll take our chances with a fair hearing, Nathan replied. Now, unless you have official business here, I'd appreciate if you'd leave our property. The emphasis on "our" was not lost on anyone present. Judge Harmon stared at them for a long moment before turning abruptly to remount his horse. This isn't over, he warned. No, Nathan agreed, but it will be once the governor's investigation is complete. They watched as the four men rode away, the tension in the air dissipating slowly with the dust from their horses' hooves. Eleanor released the breath she'd been holding. That went better than I expected. Nathan turned to her, his expression serious. He'll try something else. Men like Harmon don't give up easily when their power is threatened. What can he do? Eleanor asked. The governor's order protects us. Legally, yes, but there are other ways to force people off their land. Nathan put his arm around her shoulders. We'll need to be vigilant. That night, after Noah was asleep, they sat on the porch watching the stars emerge. Despite the confrontation with Judge Harmon, there was a peace between them that felt both new and ancient, as if they had always been meant to find each other. When should we get married? Eleanor asked, her head resting against Nathan's shoulder. As soon as possible, he replied. Not just because of the claim, but because I don't want to wait to call you my wife. Eleanor smiled in the darkness. The circuit preacher comes through Clearwater in 2 weeks. Would that be soon enough? Nathan kissed the top of her head. It will have to do, though it feels like an eternity. They sat in comfortable silence for a time before Eleanor voiced the thought that had been growing in her mind. I want to invite Gray Hawk and his people to the wedding. Without them, we might never have made it to Fort Laramie. Nathan's surprise was evident in his voice. You understand that would cause quite a stir in Clearwater. Many people still view the Lakota with suspicion and fear. Let them stir, Eleanor said firmly. Gray Hawk and his band are our friends. They should be included in our celebration. Nathan's arms tightened around her. Have I told you today how remarkable you are, Eleanor Camden? Not in the last few hours, she teased. I was beginning to worry. Their laughter mingled in the night air, a sound of simple joy that seemed to promise that whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them together. The next 2 weeks passed in a flurry of activity as they prepared both for their wedding and for the future of their homestead. Nathan rode to the Lakota camp to extend their invitation, returning with word that Gray Hawk and a small delegation would attend the ceremony. In Clearwater, news of their impending marriage spread quickly, along with rumors about the governor's investigation into Judge Harmon's activities. The town seemed divided in its loyalties, with longtime residents who benefited from the judge's patronage standing firm in his defense, while others who had witnessed his heavy-handed tactics over the years quietly expressed support for Eleanor and Nathan. The day before the wedding, Eleanor was surprised by a visit from several women from town, led by the blacksmith's wife, Mrs. Peterson. We've come to help you prepare, Mrs. Peterson announced, bustling into the cabin with baskets of food and flowers. Can't have a wedding without proper celebrations. Eleanor was touched by the unexpected support. That's very kind of you. Mrs. Peterson waved away her thanks. It's what neighbors do. Besides, it's not every day we get to see Judge Harmon taken down a peg. That man's been lording over this county for too long. With the women's help, the cabin was transformed. Fresh curtains were hung, wildflowers arranged in jars on every surface, and the yard swept clean for the outdoor ceremony. Now, about your dress, Mrs. Peterson said when the work was done. I've brought something that might suit. From one of the baskets, she produced a cream-colored dress with delicate embroidery along the bodice. It was my daughter's, but she's moved to Bismarck with her husband, never wears it anymore. With a few adjustments, it would fit you nicely. Tears sprang to Eleanor's eyes at the unexpected kindness. Mrs. Peterson, I don't know what to say. The older woman patted her hand. Say nothing, dear, just be happy. God knows there's little enough happiness in this territory without celebrating it when it comes along. The morning of the wedding dawned clear and mild, as if nature itself approved of the union. Eleanor dressed carefully in the borrowed gown, which Mrs. Peterson had altered to fit perfectly. She arranged her hair simply, with wildflowers woven into the braids that crowned her head. Noah, dressed in his best clothes, also a gift from the town women, watched from his cradle, unusually content, as if sensing the importance of the day. Shortly before noon, the sound of horses announced the arrival of the Dakota delegation. Eleanor watched from the window as Gray Hawk, White Birch, and 3 others rode into the yard, dressed in their finest attire. Nathan greeted them warmly, speaking in their language with growing fluency. More surprising was the arrival of Captain Miller from Fort Laramie, who had ridden 2 days to stand as Nathan's witness. "Couldn't miss this," he told Eleanor with a broad smile. "Never thought I'd see the day Westfield settled down." By the time Reverend Simmons arrived to perform the ceremony, the yard was filled with an unlikely gathering townsfolk, Dakota visitors, and a sprinkling of settlers from neighboring homesteads who had heard about the wedding and come to show support. Judge Harmon and his allies were conspicuously absent, a fact that no one seemed to regret. The ceremony itself was simple but profound. Standing before their assembled friends, Eleanor and Nathan exchanged vows that they had written themselves, promises not just of love and fidelity but of partnership and shared purpose. "I take you as my husband," Eleanor said clearly, her eyes never leaving Nathan's. "To stand beside through all seasons, to build a home that shelters not just our bodies but our dreams, to raise Noah and any other children we may be blessed with in love and understanding." Nathan's voice was steady as he replied, "I take you as my wife to protect and cherish, to respect and support, to journey with through whatever paths life opens before us. I pledge to be a father to Noah and a partner to you in all things." When Reverend Simmons pronounced them husband and wife, the cheer that went up from the assembled guests seemed to shake the very ground. Gray Hawk stepped forward to present them with a gift, a beautifully crafted star quilt in vibrant colors that symbolized, he explained through Nathan's translation, the joining of 2 paths into one bright future. The celebration continued through the afternoon and into the evening, with food and music and dancing that bridged cultural differences. Eleanor found herself moving from group to group, Noah in her arms, accepting congratulations and well wishes from people who just weeks before had been strangers. "You've created something remarkable here," Captain Miller observed as he prepared to leave. "Not just a marriage, but a community." Eleanor glanced at Nathan, who was deep in conversation with Gray Hawk and Reverend Simmons, seemingly at ease with both the spiritual leader of the white settlers and the leader of the Dakota band. "It's what the frontier needs," she replied. "People coming together instead of standing apart." As twilight deepened, the guests gradually departed, leaving Eleanor and Nathan alone with Noah at last. They stood on the porch of their cabin, watching the last wagon disappear down the road. "Mrs. Westfield," Nathan said softly, testing the name. Eleanor smiled up at him. "It has a nice sound to it." Nathan drew her into his arms, careful of Noah who had fallen asleep against her shoulder. "Today was just the beginning," he promised. "The best is yet to come." Later, with Noah settled in his cradle in the small room they had prepared as his nursery, Eleanor and Nathan retired to their bedroom, no longer hers alone, but theirs together. The intimacy they shared that night was both a culmination of the journey that had brought them together and the commencement of a new chapter in their lives. As Eleanor drifted towards sleep in the circle of Nathan's arms, she reflected on the strange path that had led to this moment. The heartbreak of having Noah taken from her arms had been transformed into the joy of finding not just her son, but also a love she hadn't known was possible. "What are you thinking about?" Nathan murmured against her hair. "About how sometimes the worst moment of your life can lead to the best," she replied. "If they hadn't taken Noah that day, you might never have ridden after that wagon." Nathan's arms tightened around her. "I like to think we would have found each other somehow. Some things are meant to be." Eleanor smiled in the darkness. Like a cowboy and a homesteader. Exactly like that, Nathan agreed. Now sleep, wife. Tomorrow we begin building our future. Epilogue. 5 years later, the sound of children's laughter filled the air as Eleanor hung laundry in the yard of the Westfield homestead. She paused to watch Noah, now a sturdy 5-year-old, playing with his 3-year-old sister Grace near the newly expanded barn. "Mama, look." Noah called, showing her a frog he had captured from the creek that ran along the edge of their property. "Very nice," Eleanor replied with a smile. "But remember what Papa said about returning creatures to their homes after you observe them." Noah nodded solemnly. "I will. I just want to show Grace first." Eleanor watched as her son carefully held the frog for his little sister to see, patiently explaining its features with the seriousness of a natural teacher. Her heart swelled with pride at the kind, thoughtful boy he was becoming. The sound of approaching horses drew her attention to the road. Nathan appeared on Rusty alongside Gray Hawk and Swift Deer. The three had been surveying the boundaries of the expanded reservation lands that Governor Pennington, true to his word, had established following the investigation that had ended Judge Harmon's career. The former judge had eventually faced charges not just for his illegal land dealings but for embezzlement of county funds. He now resided in the territorial prison, his empire of corruption dismantled. "Mama, Papa's home," Noah shouted, abandoning his frog to run toward his father. Nathan dismounted, scooping his son up for a hug before setting him down to greet Grace, who toddled toward him with outstretched arms. "And how are my favorite women?" he asked, crossing to Eleanor with both children in tow. "Better now that you're home," Eleanor replied, accepting his kiss. "How was the survey?" "Productive. The boundary markers are all in place. Gray Hawk is satisfied with the arrangement." The Lakota leader nodded in agreement as he dismounted. Over the years, his English had improved considerably, just as Nathan's Lakota had become nearly fluent. "Good land," Gray Hawk said. "Good water. Enough space for the people to live in the old ways if they choose." It was more than most tribes had been granted, a testament to the changing attitudes that Nathan and Eleanor had helped foster in the region. Their homestead had become a meeting place where settlers and Lakota alike were welcome, a neutral ground where understanding could grow. "Will you stay for supper?" Eleanor asked their visitors. "White Birch sent some of her berry preserves last week that I've been saving for a special occasion." Gray Hawk smiled. "We accept with thanks. Swift Deer has news to share." The younger man, now in his mid-20s, looked simultaneously proud and embarrassed. "I am to be married at the next full moon," he announced. "To Singing Brook, daughter of Black Crow, congratulations." Eleanor exclaimed, "You must bring her to visit us soon." As the men unsaddled their horses, Eleanor returned to the cabin to begin preparing the evening meal. The home had grown along with their family, with Nathan adding rooms as needed and improving the original structure until it was both sturdy and comfortable. On the wall beside the fireplace hung the star quilt from their wedding, its vibrant colors a daily reminder of the diverse community they had helped build. Beside it was a more recent addition, a framed copy of the territorial proclamation establishing the new reservation boundaries, with Nathan listed as one of the primary negotiators. Eleanor still marveled sometimes at how far they had come from that terrible day when Noah had been torn from her arms. The pain of that memory had faded, replaced by the joy of the life they had built together. As she worked in the kitchen, she heard Nathan enter with the children. "Papa says we can visit the reservation for the wedding," Noah informed her excitedly. "And that maybe someday I can learn to ride like Swift Deer." "Did he now?" Eleanor asked, raising an eyebrow at her husband. Nathan shrugged with a smile. "He has a natural seat on a horse." "Takes after his mother," Eleanor laughed. "Flatterer. Now wash up, all of you. Our guests will be hungry after their long ride." As Nathan helped the children clean up, Eleanor felt the familiar flutter in her belly that signaled their family would be growing again soon. She hadn't told Nathan yet, waiting for the right moment to share the news. Perhaps tonight, she thought, after the children were asleep and their guests had departed. Another child to love, another heart to join the family that had begun in such unlikely circumstances. Outside, the sun was setting over the Dakota Territory, painting the land in gold and promise. Eleanor paused by the window to take in the view the rolling hills where their expanded herd of cattle grazed, the fields of wheat ripening in the summer heat, the creek where Noah had found his frog. This land that had once been merely Thomas's dream had become the foundation for something larger than Eleanor could have imagined. Not just a homestead, but a home in the truest sense, a place of belonging, of love, of connection that stretched beyond the boundaries of their property to embrace a wider community. And at the center of it all was the cowboy who had ridden after a wagon and hadn't stopped until justice was done. The man who now crossed the kitchen to stand beside her at the window, slipping his arm around her waist with the easy familiarity of deep love. "Happy?" Nathan asked quietly. Eleanor leaned into his embrace, covering his hand with hers where it rested on her still flat stomach. "More than I ever thought possible," she replied, "and it's only the beginning." The end.